हरिः ओम् नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य अद्य 19 पाठः। अस्मिन् वर्गे विधिसूत्राणाम् अर्थनिर्णयः कथं करणीयः इत्यस्मिन् विषये कांश्चन बिन्दून् पश्यामः. So the topic is pretty broad. In today's class, I'm only going to give a basic overview. Whatever we learn in today's class is going to be extremely fundamental for all 100 classes that follow, because the techniques that we use today the techniques that we learn today are going to be used in all these classes to understand the meaning of various sutras that we will come across. शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायम् अधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। अस्माकं वर्गस्य द्वे प्रयोजने अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य 400 सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनं, तथा च अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य कण्ठस्थीकरणम्। प्रारभामहे. So 2 classes ago, we saw that out of all different 10 types of sutras, say Samya, Paribhasha, Niyama, Atidesha, and so on, you can create your own types also. But the Vidhi Sutra is the most fundamental type. There are more than 3000 Vidhi Sutras in Ashtadhyayi. These are the sutras that actually do the work, the crux of the Sutra Patha. And the work that these Vidhi Sutras do is of 5 types: Pratyaya Vidhanam, Adesha Vidhanam, Agama Vidhanam, Lopa Vidhanam, and Dvitva Vidhanam. Now, in order to interpret these Vidhi Sutras, simply by looking at that sutram is not sufficient. A complete meaning of that sutram is only evident when we bring other words from adjacent sutras and from the surrounding context into that sutra. So, in order to understand those concepts, we learned the topic of Anuvritti, Mandukapluti, Apakarsha, and Adhikaraha. सो क्रमेण विद्यमानेषु सूत्रेषु ये शब्दाः पुनः पुनः आवश्यकाः ते क्रमस्य प्रारंभे स्थाप्यन्ते चेत् अनुवृत्तिः इति तस्य निर्देशः भवति. This anuvritti, if it jumps sutras like a frog, we refer to as manduka plutihi. Sometimes the word anuvritti can be used to represent manduka pluti also. And in very rare cases, a word can be copied to the previous sutram. It is called apakarshaha. So these three are related concepts. And equally related is this concept of adhikaraha. So a topic heading or all the words required for a certain prakaranam topic are extracted in a separate sutram at the beginning of that particular prakaranam. This is called adhikaraha. For our day-to-day conversation, we differentiate between adhikara and anuvritti, but we also saw that in Mahabhashyam, everything is being referenced by the single word called adhikara. So with these basic fundamental tools, the anuvritti, mandukapluti, apakarsha, adhikara, and so on, let us now directly jump to the most important question. Vidhi sutranam samagram arthavaгаmanam katham bhavati? Asya arthavagamanasya krute kim kim avashyakam? So given a sutram, it can be a simple sutram, say like iko yanachi, or it can be a complex sutram like sampruchanudhang yamang yasa parisu sampruch, and so on. You have already written that in one of the homeworks. So irrespective of whichever sutra is given, the very first step that we want to do is sutre vidyamananam padanam prathakkaranam kriyate padachedha kriyate तत्र विद्यमानानि पदानि समस्तपदानि सन्ति चेत् तत्र समास विग्रहः अपि क्रियते. So this is actually no brainer. You do this not just for sutras but also for shlokas. So anytime a shloka is given, you first break the padas, break the sandhis, look at the samasas, break the samasas, and so on. So this step is even common for Anvaya process and for Sutrartha process. So let's take one simple example. Sanyogantasya lopaha, which is 8.2.23. We are going to take this sutram all the way through these steps and understand how the meaning of this sutram unfolds at every step sequentially. So संयोगान्तस्य लोपः इत्यत्र किं किं पदम् इति प्रश्ने कृते, obviously संयोगान्तस्य is one pada and lopaha is another pada. Now, is any of them samasta pada? So obviously sanyogantasya. So it has a pratipadika called sanyoganta, which is a samasta pada. It can be broken down further. So संयोगान्तस्य इति समस्तपदं तत्र प्रातिपदिकं संयोगान्त तस्य विग्रहः कः संयोगः अन्ते यस्य सः संयोगान्तः. Now you can also say संयोगान्तस्य लोपः इत्युक्ते संयोगस्य अन्तः संयोगान्तः. So you have to take the help of commentaries anytime you are confused. So over here the generally accepted vigraha is संयोगः अन्ते यस्य सः संयोगान्तः, an entity at end of which a sanyoga is present is called sanyogantah. Now once you have this vigraha, you take this vigraha and you put it back in the original sutram. So instead of the word sanyogantasya, you now put this vigraha vakya with the appropriate vibhaktis or with the appropriate vibhaktis being adjusted. So you will get sanyogaha ante yasya. So that will be now your sanyoganta tasya lopaha. So the newly inserted words are now underlined. This might look trivial, but this is the exercise that we have to do again and again for multiple sutras till this exercise becomes extremely evident and you can do this in your brain. So to start with, संयोगान्तस्य तथा लोपः इति पदद्वयं, we break the word संयोगान्तस्य further. संयोगः अन्ते यस्य तस्य लोपः. Now in the second step, in order to understand or in order to complete all the words of this sutram, we need to bring in adhikara, anuvrutti, manduka pluti and apakarsha. So sutre avashyakanam anuvrutti adhikara manduka pluti apakarshanam sutre samsthapanam kriyate. So you pick those words as it is. In some rare cases, when a word is picked as an anuvrutti or an adhikara, its vibhakti changes. So sometimes when you have an adhikara called angasya, when you bring that adhikara word angasya in a sutram, the vibhakti will change and it will become angat. Shashti will become panchami. All these nuances you have to learn from the commentaries or you have to take help from the commentaries. So in general, for in this particular case, the sanyogantasya lopaha, this particular sutram has padasya as the adhikara in which this sutra is placed. There are a few other adhikaras as well, but we will keep them aside. परंतु अत्र अस्य सूत्रस्य विषये अनुवृत्तिः नास्ति, मण्डूकप्लुतिः नास्ति, अपकर्षः अपि नास्ति, पदस्य इति अधिकारः अस्ति. So we bring that word padasya in this particular sutram. संयोगः अन्ते यस्य padasya tasya lopaha. Now see, the meaning has already started unfolding in front of us. Simply saying sanyogantasya lopaha was little bit less evident. Now it is much more evident. Yasya padasya ante sanyogaha tasya ityukte tasya padasya lopaha. So संयोगः ante yasya padasya tasya lopaha iti idanim adhikara sahitam anuvrutti sahitam sutram jatam. Now the next step is to look at this expanded statement and see which are grammatical terms in this particular statement. Because these grammatical terms are going to have their own meaning. And we need to use those meanings instead of what we just know. So for example, tasya, yasya are normal Sanskrit words. Whatever we use in our day-to-day conversation, the same meaning is used over here. But that's not true for the word like sanyoga and for lopa. To that matter, even for pada, but the grammatical meaning of pada, suptingantam padam, is almost same as the word pada that we use in our day-to-day life. So we will keep that aside. I mean, for simplicity, I'm keeping that aside. Technically, when you do the full expansion, you also need to do the same exercise for pada. But let's keep that aside for now and focus on these more technical terms called Sanyoga and Lopaha. So the next step is take these technical terms and you expand them. Instead of using the technical term, use its definition. So sutre prayuktanam samya shabdanam vistaraha. So in sanyogantasya lopaha, sanyoga iti samnyasti, lopa iti samnyasti. Padasya is also coming, but as I mentioned, we are going to keep that aside for simplicity. So let's expand sanyoga, let's expand lopa. Sanyoga is halonantaraha sanyogaha. We are going to learn this sutram in details. We have mentioned it in one of the previous classes. And similarly, lopaha is adarshanam. So you take that halonantaraha sanyogaha, you repeat the same exercise recursively. So halonantaraha is broken down into halaha and anantaraha. And you use those terms anantaraha and halaha. And for lopaha, you use the term adarshanam because that's the meaning of the word lopaha. And now the sutra becomes Yasya padasya ante anantaraha halaha. Anantara means without any gap, consecutive. So yasya padasya ante consecutive halaha. Hal varnaha kramena kasyapi vyavadhanam vina sthapitaha santi. So yasya padasya ante anantaraha halaha tasya padasya adarshanam. This is now the expanded statement. Now, just like the way we did this exercise for samnyas, we also need to do this exercise for paribhashas. Paribhasha will tell you the precise way a sutra should be interpreted. So once the anuvrittis, adhikaras, samnyas are all brought in and fixed in that particular sutram, the next step is to understand how the individual words of the sutra need to be interpreted, need to be understood, need to be explored, evolved or expanded. So here in Sanyogantasya Lopaha, whatever we have expanded, Yasya Padasya Ante Anantaraha Halaha Tasya Padasya Adarshanam. So there is this Padasya Adarshanam Bhavati. Padasya Adarshanam Ityukte Kasya Adarshanam. So that is a question that needs to be expanded, that needs to be elaborated upon. So padasya adarshanam asya samyak rupena arthajnanartham, we have to bring in two different paribhashas from 1.1. Now I don't expect you to know these paribhashas. We are going to learn this in the upcoming classes, but just follow along what I am teaching. So there is a paribhasha called yena vidhistadantasya and there is a paribhasha called shashthi sthani yoga. These two paribhashas are to be brought in for interpretation of this particular statement. How are these paribhashas used? So, yena vidhis tadantasya. See this word tadantasya. Anta is that component. So, that paribhasha, yena vidhis tadantasya, will bring the word called antima varnasya. How is that Antima Varnasya brought in? We will discuss later. We are going to study these sutras in detail. But for now, understand that Yena Vidhis Tadantasya is going to bring this Antima Varnasya component in your full statement. And similarly, Shashti Sthani Yoga, it has the word Sthani. It brings that particular word Sthani in your full statement. So two paribhashas, each paribhasha brings in one word. It's not an anuvritti that is being brought in. It is the paribhasha that imparts the meaning. So meaning, for expressing that meaning, a certain word is placed in that complete sutram. So now the sutram becomes Yasya padasya ante anantaraha halaha tasya padasya antima varnasya sthane adarshanam. And now suddenly everything has unfolded. Look at the original sutram called Sanyogantasya Lopaha and look at this newly generated sutram called Yasya Padasya Ante Anantaraha Halaha. A pada whose end has continuous vyanjanas, continuous consonants, tasya padasya antima varnasya sthane, whatever is the last letter of that pada, adarshanam, that letter is no more seen. This entire meaning is now possible after bringing in anuvrittis, adhikaras, samnyas, paribhashas, and so on. And in this course, We talked about padas, we talked about anuvrutti, adhikara, manduka pluti, apakarsha. So we have completed till step number 2. And now the most important steps are understanding the Samnya Sutras and the Paribhasha Sutras, which is going to be the topic of our next module. So the entire module number 3 is all about Samnya Paribhasham, all about important Samnyas and important Paribhashas. So after module 3, when we actually will enter the Ach Sandhis and the Subanta Prakaranam and so on, we will have all the tools necessary for completing these 4 steps. So in this way, Vidhisutrasya Sampurna Rupena Arthavagamanaartham Kim Kim Avashyakam iti chet पदप विग्रह समास विग्रह अनुवृत्ति अधिकार इत्यादीनां सूत्रे संस्थापनम संज्ञा शब्दानां विस्तरः तथा च परिभाषाणां प्रयोगेण उचितस्य शब्दस्य स्थापनम. All this gets done, and finally the sentence for sanyogantasya lopaha, the sentence that is created is yasya padasya ante anantaraha halaha tasya padasya antima varnasya sthane adarshanam. What is the kriya over here? Technically, the correct kriya over here is bhavitum arhati. Bhavati tina, bhavitum arhati. When a pada has continuous hal letters at the end, the last letter of that pada is eligible for removal, is eligible for elision. Why do we say eligible? Because we still don't know whether the particular sutra will act in that particular location. All that the sutra says is it is eligible, and therefore continuing with this arthagamanam process, the immediate next important task is to understand where this eligibility gets converted into a vidhi. Because simply saying I am eligible to do something, I am eligible to climb Himalaya doesn't mean anything. Actually, are you climbing Himalaya or not? So we now want to convert this eligibility into the actual vidhi, into the actual action. So that is the karya kshetrasya avagamanam. We understood the detailed meaning, but where is the sutra applicable? So sutrasya karya kshetrasya avagamanam avashyakam vartate. And how is this Karya Kshetra, the entire area where the sutra may operate? How is this found out? We find this out not by simply looking at the sutram and expanding it. That's not sufficient. So the steps of the previous slide are not sufficient, but we also need to look at the context around it. Tasya sutrasya sandarbhena ke niyamaha santi. के प्रतिषेधाः सन्ति काः काः विभाषाः अतिदेशः अस्ति वा अनुवृत्त एतेषां सर्वेषां साकल्येन अध्ययनं करणीयम्. And what exactly happens? You not just study this niyamas, pratishedas, vibhasha, and so on, but you bring all those niyama, pratisheda, vibhasha into that particular statement that you have constructed, along with its anuvrittis, its samnyas, its paribhashas. So it's a recursive process. You start with the sutram, expand it, look into its dependencies. In the software term, a library might have a dependency on another. So look at its dependencies and then expand those dependencies in the same way of anuvritti, adhikara, manduka pluti, and so on, and put that all material into the current sutra which is under discussion. So taking the example of Sanyogantasya Lopaha immediately has a Niyama Sutram after it, 8 to 24, which is Ratsasya. Ratsasya Sutra. Now, obviously, you will have to do all this exercise, bringing anuvrittis and so on. But the meaning of Ratsasya is Refat Parasya Sakarasya Eva Lopaha Bhavati Anyasya Lopaha Na Bhavati. So, what we were discussing earlier, if there is a Sanyoga at the end, remove last letter of that Sanyoga. That's not good enough description. The next Niyama says you are allowed to remove that last letter, but if the first member of that Sanyoga is R, Repha, then the last letter, that is the second letter of the Sanyoga, can only be removed if it is a Sakara, otherwise it cannot be removed. So this is a Ratsasya Niyama Sutra. You need to take this Niyama Sutra, separately process it by adding anuvrittis, adhikaras, apakarshas, samya, paribhasha, and so on. So Ratsasyeti Niyamaha यथोचितं संज्ञा परिभाषाणां साहाय्येन मूलसूत्रे आनीय संस्थाप्यते, and then the result will be यस्य पदस्य अन्ते अनन्तराः हलः तस्य पदस्य अन्तिमवर्णस्य स्थाने अदर्शनं विधीयते, परन्तु रेफात् परस्य केवलं सकारस्य एव स्थाने अदर्शनं विधीयते, अन्येषां स्थाने न. So all this underlined part, parantu refat parasya and so on, is the expansion of ratsasya, which is now brought into this sanyogantasya lopaha. In this way, we started with a two-word sutram called sanyogantasya lopaha, and we have ended in a huge statement. Yasya padasya ante anantaraha halaha तस्य पदस्य अंतिमवर्णस्य स्थाने अदर्शनं विधीयते, परन्तु रेफात् परस्य केवलं सकारस्यैव स्थाने अदर्शनं विधीयते, अन्येषां स्थाने न. This complete statement now is eligible for explaining the karya kshetra. So where is Sanyuganta Silopa operatable? Sanyuganta Silopa is now operable on all Sanyogas at the end of a pada. And when there is the first letter is ra, then the second letter must be sa. Other sanyogas of that category are not going to use this sutram sanyogantasya lopaha. So in this way, in order to understand the sutram completely, now there is no hidden things over here. So in order to understand this sutram, any sutram like this completely, Ashtadhyayaha vidhisutrasya arthasya तथा च कार्यक्षेत्रस्य साकल्येन अवगमनार्थं मूलसूत्रात् आरम्भं कृत्वा तत्र आवश्यकानां सर्वेषाम् अपि अनुवृत्ति अधिकार मंडूकप्लुति अपकर्ष संज्ञा परिभाषा नियम अतिदेश विभाषा इत्यादीनां विषयाणां सूत्रे संस्थापनम, whatever we did in last 5 steps, तस्य नाम एकवाक्यता इति अस्ति. One of the very important but highly overlooked term in grammar. You won't hear this term in any of the basic courses, but in my opinion, ekavakyata is such a fundamental concept in Paninian grammar that unless you understand how a sutra has to be expanded, everything that is written in the commentary will always be Greek and Latin, will always be matter of surprise. But follow these 5 steps sequentially. In other words, given any sutram, do ekavakyata as the first step. What is ekavakyata? Bringing everything together. Ekam vakyam rachayati. So you take different fragments from different places and convert them into a big mahavakya, big sentence that captures everything associated with that sutram. And here I have only given examples. So for example, padasya can also be expanded. This sutram comes in asiddhadhikar. I don't want you to know anything about it right now, but there's a special adhikar called asiddhadhikar. So that particular adhikara needs to be factored in. So this is simple, a trivial expansion. If you actually go in details, 3, 4, 5 more statements will be added over here. But that whole thing is called ekavakyata. So let me read this definition once again. अष्टाध्याय्याः विधिसूत्रस्य अर्थस्य कार्यक्षेत्रस्य च साकल्येन अवगमनार्थं मूलसूत्रात् आरम्भं कृत्वा तत्र आवश्यकानां सर्वेषाम् अपि अनुवृत्ति अधिकार मंडूकप्लुति अपकर्ष संज्ञा परिभाषा नियम अतिदेश विभाषादीनां विषयाणां सूत्रे संस्थापनम् एकवाक्यता namna ज्ञायते. This process is called ekavakyata. I'm going to take a minute pause over here. If there are any questions, please raise hands. If not, we will move ahead. Chandramouli Mahoday.
So in the case of Anuvritti, when we are bringing in terms from the previous sutras, is it possible that these terms in different sutras in different contexts have different meanings? And if so, should the Anuvritti always be Is there an applicability of the anuvritti?
So anuvritti is always to be taken in the same meaning. There might be a vibhakti change, but for example, if the word acha is used as the pratyahara in the previous sutram, you have to use it in the meaning of pratyahara only in the next sutram. You cannot use it in the meaning of pratyaya, like that. So meaning cannot change. Okay. Any other? Okay, agre gacchamaha. So lots of things to be covered today. Now, once we have this ekavakyata and once we have this huge statement, we still need to find the meaning. So the next important process to decipher this meaning is to understand the concept of uddeshya and vidheya. Again, extremely basic but highly ignored, highly overlooked concept. You will not learn about uddeshya and vidheya unless you learn really high level grammar texts. But I think that's not the place to learn uddeshya and vidheya. It should be right in the beginning. So ekavakyatayam krutayam विधिसूत्रस्य अर्थावगमनार्थं तस्मिन् सूत्रे विद्यमानस्य उद्देश्यस्य विधेयस्य च निर्णयः करणीयः. Now, what is an uddeshya and what is a videya? We can talk about it in details, but I don't want to spend time on that. In just one meaning, in just 1 minute or a one-line meaning is that when you're stating something, the entity that you already know or the information that you already know is called uddeshya. And the new information that is being given about that entity which is already known is called videya. So, for example, if you say Devadattaha Gacchati, then the very way in which this sutram is said indicates that you know who is Devadatta and you are telling that Devadatta is now doing the action of going. So, here Devadatta is the previously known entity, it is Uddeshya, whereas Gacchati is the Videya. But if you flip this statement, Yaha gacchati saha devadattaha. So you're pointing to somebody who is walking. So an entity which is now known is Yaha gacchati saha. And you are in giving a new information about that entity that it is Devadatta. So in this case, Yaha gacchati saha devadattaha. Yaha gacchati saha is the Uddesha, Devadatta is the Videya. So anything that is already known, यस्य संदर्भेण विधानं क्रियते तदुद्देश्यं यद विधानं क्रियते तद विधेयम्. So this is the fundamental definition or the explanation of the words uddesha and videya in the normal language, and the same meaning is also carried ahead in the Vyakarana Shastra. So specifically talking about Vidhi Sutras, yasya sandarbhena vidhi uchyate tad uddeshyam. So sanyogantasya lopaha, you already know that there is a pada which has a sanyoga at the end. So that's your uddesha. What is happening to that sanyoga? Lopa. So that's the vidheya. So yasya shabdasya padasya varnasya pratyayasya yasyaha prakrutehe va sandarbhena vidhi uchyate taduddeshyam yaha vidhi uchyate tad vidheyam. Now with this particular definition, once you have that ekavakyata, the most important next step is to understand which component in the sutram is uddeshyam and which component in the sutram is vidheyam. Because uddesha is the thing that you know, so it comes from the previous step of the prakriya. And vidheyam is the new transformation that happens in that step of the prakriya. So once you understand uddesham and vidheyam, you are done with that step of the prakriya and you can move on. So let's focus on this uddesham and vidheyam. Tatra uddesham chaturvidham vartate. Uddesha is something that you already know and it is of 4 types. Sthani, agami, purvanimittam and paranimittam. So sthani is the entity on which the adesha is going to happen and remove the sthani and sit over there. Agami is the entity on which the agama is going to happen either to the left or to the right without removing that agami. Purva nimittam is an entity which sits to the left, which sits before that sthani or agami. So sometimes in an example, taking an example of our classroom, teacher says, Devadatta, stand up. And then there are 4 Devadattas, and then there is a question which Devadatta will stand up. So teacher will say, that Devadatta who is sitting after Yajnadatta should stand up. So uniquely identifying an entity might require a reference from the left, that is Purvanimittam. Similarly, it might require a reference from the right, that is Paranimittam. So maybe out of those 4 Devadattas, 2 Devadattas are sitting behind Yajnadatta, maybe because there are 2 Yajnadattas. So then teacher will clarify more. That Devadatta who is sitting behind Yajnadatta and in front of Somadatta should stand up. So Purva Nimittam, so in this particular example, Devadatta is known to us, Yajnadatta is known to us, Somadatta is known to us, action of standing is being told. So all this, the Purva Nimittam, the Para Nimittam, the Sthani are all Uddesham, are all already known to us. Sthani is the direct target. Agami, similarly the direct target. Purva Nimittam is the entity to after which the target will be present. Paranimittam is the entity before which the target is present. And then Vidheya, somebody just wrote a chat over here. Vidheyam is the actual action that happens on that target. And what kind of action might happen? I have repeated this probably 100 times in this course. Vidheyam panchavidham vartate pratyayaha adeshaha agamaha lopaha dvitvam. So let's take some examples to understand this. You have the sutram Guptichkidbhyas san. Now you have to do ekavakyata, but I'm going to skip that because I have taken really simple sutras. So Guptichkidbhyas san. Gupa, tija, tatha kita etebhyaha dhatubhyaha san iti pratyayaha vidhiyate. So here these dhatus are purva nimittas because the pratyay is going to come and sit after them. It is expected that you already know there are dhatus called gupa, tija and kita, and a new pratyay is going to come and sit over there. When I say you already know that there are dhatus gupa, tija and kita, it doesn't refer to your knowledge of dhatu patha. What it refers is on in the prakriya, on the previous step, there must already be gupa, tija or kita dhatu. Only then on the next step the san pratyaya will come. So at any particular step in prakriya, whatever you have on the previous step of the prakriya is known to you, and whatever new stuff that you are adding on that particular step is the videya. So guptij kidhyas san ityatra gupa tija kita iti dhatavaha, these are all purva nimitta, because after that san pratyaya is going to sit. San is the videya. So that's an example of a vidheya, which is a pratyaya, and that's an example of an uddesha, which is a purva nimitta. Another sutram, trestrayaha. Tri iti shabdasya am pratyaye pare traya iti adeshah bhavati. The shashti bahuvachan of three is trayanam. That 3 to traya conversion happens in this sutram. So 3 iti shabdasya. So on the previous step of the prakriya, there must be a configuration called 3 plus am. And only then 3 is going to become traya. So 3 is known, am is known, and now the adesha is newly told. So trihi iti sthani asti. So that's the uddesha of the type sthani. Am is also the uddesha of the type paranimittam because it sits after that three. Am pratyaye pare traya adeshaha bhavati. And that traya, which is the adesha, is the vidheya. So here the vidheya is of the type adesha. There are multiple uddeshas. One uddesha is of the type sthani, other uddesha is of the type paranimitta. Next sutram, idito num dhatoho. Yaha dhat, saha dhatuhu yasmin ikaraha anubandhaha asti. We have seen this in one of the previous classes. Tasya dhatoho num agamaha bhavati. So you must have a dhatu like vadi, which has an itsamnyaka ikara on the previous step. Even if that ikara is gone by tasya lopaha, you still have that memory remnant sitting over there. So such a dhatu which is available on the previous step is the agami, which is your uddesha, and this numagama that you are doing on this particular step is vidheya. Sanyogantasya lopaha, we already saw this. Sanyogantam padam iti uddesha, lopa iti vidheyam. I am giving one example of each of the type of vidheyas. So you have pratyaya as a vidheyam, adesha as a vidheyam, agama as a vidheyam, lopa as a vidheyam, and finally there is also an example of dvitva as a vidheyam. You can go through this particular example, achorahabhyam dve. Here you have a purva nimittam, you have Uddesh, you have the Sthani, which is also Uddesham, and you have Dvitvam, which is Vidheyam. So in this particular way, in any particular step of the prakriya, you have an Uddesham, which could be either Sthani or Agami. Sthani for Adesha or Lopa or Dvitva. Agami is for Agama. You can still use the word Sthani everywhere. It's not an issue, but I just wanted to be technically more correct. So Sthani or Agami. Purva Nimittam is that entity that sits before the Sthani. So Purvam Ucharyate. Vyakarana is about pronunciation of the language. So Purvam Ucharyate tat Purva Nimittam. Anantaram Ucharyate tat Paranimittam. So that's the Paranimittam. So they must be in the sequence. Purvanimitta does not mean 10 letters before. Paranimitta does not mean 10 letters later. It has to be in the sequence. Sometimes 1, 2 letters here and there is understandable. For example, in classroom, you can say that Devadatta who is 2 benches behind Yajnadatta stand up. So some rare cases you see that particular thing, but in 99.9% of the cases, the Purva Nimittam must be immediately before, the Paranimittam must be immediately after of that particular Sthani and Agami, and all these constitute Uddeshya, and the Vidheya is Pratyaya, Adesha, Agama, Lopa or Dvitvam. And now, how to find what is Purvanimittam, what is Paranimittam, what is Sthani, what is Pratyaya, what is Adesha, and so on. So, Panini Maharshi has created a beautiful system to actually understand each of these components. So, he says, I will use Shashti Vibhakti to indicate a Sthani. See, Sanyogantasya Lopaha, Shashti is used. He says, I'll use Shashti to indicate the Sthani or the Agami. I'll use Panchami to indicate the Purvanimitta. I will use Saptami to indicate the Paranimitta. I will use Prathama to indicate the Vidheya, Adesha, Agama, Lopa, and so on. So purely by using 4 vibhaktis, Panchami, Shashti, Saptami, and Prathama, the entire system of Uddeshya and Vidheya is beautifully hard-coded in this particular framework of 4000 sutras. Let's see some examples. But before that, always you have that statutory warning, right? So Panchami, Shashti, asterisk conditions apply. So Panchami, Shashti, Saptami, you see blindly it means Purva Nimitta, Paranimitta. It's not like that. Saptami, Panchami, Shashti Vibhaktinam, Anyani api Prayojanani Santi. So we will learn about these things as the course progresses. But for now, in order to understand the Uddeshyas and Vidheyas, this particular diagram, this particular association of Vibhaktis will be extremely useful. So let's take some examples. Sthani or the Agami. What is Sthani or the Agami? It is an Uddeshya. So tat Uddeshyam yasya sthane no chet yena sah agamaha adeshaha lopaha dvitvam bhavati. That Sthani is indicated by Shashti Vibhakti. Please understand, pratyaya is not sthane. Pratyaya is afterwards. So for pratyaya, we'll always have purva nimitta. I'll talk about it later on. But for others, adesha, agama, lopa, dvitva, we will have the sthani or the agami represented by the shashti vibhakti. So the same example, trestrayaha. The three shabdasya shashti bahuvachanasya pratyaya pare traya iti adeshaha bhavati. So who is the sthani? Three is the sthani. What is it? Shashti ekvachanam? Like munihi becomes munehe, trihi will become trehe. So trehe iti shashtyantam prayuktam. Now you might ask, trehe is panchami also because munehe is panchami also. So again, all these doubts, vyakhyanato vishesha pratipattir nahi sandehad lakshanam. So look at the commentaries. Look at the commentaries and use these techniques so that you will understand what is written in the commentaries and what is the logic behind all those things. So trehe trayaha ityatra trihi iti sthani. That sthani is indicated by shashti vibhakti. Napumsakasya jhalachaha. So napumsakalinga shabdasya num agamaha bhavati. So napumsakasya, that's the agami. So shashti vibhakti prayukta asti. Tasastyoho lopaha. Tas and asti, two entities are being discussed. So tas pratyaya, there is a pratyaya called tas, and asadhatuhu etayoho vishishtasu sthitishu lopaha bhavati. So that's the lopa which is the vidheya, and the entity, the sthani is the tas and asti. So you combine them to form tasasti. Again runs like muni, munyoho. Now because there are two entities, shashti dvivachanam. So tasastyoho, like munyoho, tasastyoho iti shashti dvivachanam prayuktamasti. नादिन्या कोशे पुत्रस्य, the word putra, verbatim, पुत्र इति स्थानी. So पुत्र इति शब्दस्य द्वित्वस्य विषये अत्र कश्चन नियमः उक्तः अस्ति, निषेधः उक्तः अस्ति. So again, पुत्र शब्दस्य विशिष्टासु स्थितिषु द्वित्वं न भवति इति प्रतिषेधसूत्रस्य अर्थः. So the putra word is the sthani, so that is used in the shashti vibhakti. In this way, actually there is a homework today that I'm going to give you sutras and I want you to find out which is the uddesha, what kind of uddesha it is. It is sthani, purvanimitta, paranimitta and so on. It's going to be fun doing that particular homework. So this particular way, sthani or agami is always indicated by shashti vibhakti. Let's go to Purva Nimittam. Purva Nimittam, as the word indicates, Purva, it comes before, it is pronounced after, it is pronounced earlier. So which means that the sthani or the agami will sit after the Purva Nimittam. It's like left opening bracket. So after the Purva Nimittam. So Purva Nimittam is again an uddesha. Tat uddesham yasmad anantaram vidyamanasya shabdasya adesha ityadikam bhavati. So this particular uddesham is indicated by Panchami Vibhakti. Look at this sutram. Upasargat, sunoti, suvatisyati and so on. Upasargat. It's a giveaway. Upasargat iti panchamyantaha nirdeshaha atah upasarga iti पूर्वनिमित्त रूपेण स्वीक्रियते. उपसर्गात् अनन्तरं विद्यमानः सुनोति इति धातुः सुवति स्यति and so on इत्यादीनां विषये whatever कार्य is being told सकारस्य षत्वं भवति. So abhishunoti, parishuvati. So that sa is being converted to sh. That's the vidheya. And who is the purva nimitta? The purva nimitta is upasargat. You also have a sthani over here. Upo, sunoti, suvati, sthati and so on is sthani. And it is also indicated in Shashti Bahuvachanam. So swanjam, like marutam. So swanjam, that is the Shashti Bahuvachanam. So you have one sthani uddesham, which is Shashti Bahuvachanam. You have one purva nimittam, which is panchami. So in this way, the panchami is used to indicate purva nimitta. Kashyadibhyaha thainithau. काश्यादि गणस्य शब्देभ्यः ठय तथा इठ इति प्रत्ययौ भवतः. So pratyayas, it's actually there on the next bullet. So prakrutihi api pratyayasya purvanimitta rupena eva svikriyate. I should have given some different example over here, but that's okay. Prakrutihi iti pratyayasya eva purvanimitta rupena svikriyate. So prakriti is also indicated by panchami vibhakti. So in kashyadibhyaha ठय इठौ, Kashyadibhyaha is the Prakriti, it is the Kashyadi Gana, to which a particular Pratyaya Thai and Yitha is being added, one at a time, not both, but to which this particular Pratyaya is added. So Kashyadibhyaha is used in Panchami. Another example, Gupu Dhupa Vichhipanipanibbhya Ayaha. So Gupu Dhupa Vichhipanipanibbhya is Panchami Bahuvachanam. All these are dhatus. I think this question was given in one of the homeworks. So all these are dhatus. They are represented by purva nimitta because aya pratyaya is added to these dhatus and therefore it is used in the panchami bahuvachanam. In this way, the sthani is indicated by shashti, the purva nimitta is indicated by panchami. Both of these are uddeshas. The paranimitta is indicated by saptami. So paranimitta is like the closing bracket, an entity which is pronounced later on. So tasmat purvam vidyamanasya shabdasya adeshah agamah ityadikam bhavati. So tad uddesham yasmat purvam vidyamanasya shabdasya adeshah agamah lopah dvitvam bhavati. Etadrisham uddeshyam saptami vibhaktya nirdishyate. So here is an example. Rathavadayoscha. Rathavadayoho iti saptami dvivachanam asti. When something is followed by the word ratha or when something is followed by the word vada, some particular action happens. So ratha tatha vada एतेषु कश्चन शब्दः परनिमित्तमस्ति अनन्तरं विद्यते चेत् तस्मात् पूर्वं विद्यमानस्य कु इति शब्दस्य कद् इति आदेशः भवति. So this extra information is not needed. I'm just giving you, I'm not teaching any sutram over here. I'm just trying to show you how the vibhaktis are being used. So for example, kutsitaha rathaha, ku plus ratha. Now because the ratha comes later on, that's the paranimitta. Before that, ku becomes kada. So that's kadratha and so on. Another example, ino ga lungi. Lungi iti lung iti lakarasya saptami ekvachanam. So lung lakarasya pratyaye pare. Inaha is shashti. So very simple sutram actually. Inaha is shashti, which means ina dhatoho sthani. Ga is prathama. So ga iti adeshaha bhavati. कदा लुङ्लकारस्य प्रत्ययः अग्रे अस्ति चेत्. सो लुङ्लकारस्य प्रत्ययः परनिमित्तरूपेण विद्यते चेत् इण इति धातोः गा इति आदेशः भवति. सो लुङ्लकारस्य प्रथमपुरुषे एकवचनम् अगात्. सो गा आदेश त प्रत्यय इज द लुङ्लकार प्रत्यय, अडागम कम्स अगात् इति रूपं सिद्ध्यति. नामी, नाम इति मकारांत प्रातिपदिकम तस्य सप्तमी एकवचनम. नाम is the षष्ठी बहुवचन प्रत्यय, but nami word is the saptami ekvachana of that pratyaya. It is used as a paranimitta. So naam pratyaye pare dirghadeshah bhavati. So rama to ramanam, muni to muninam, sadhunam, that is this nami sutram. So naam pratyaye pare dirghadeshah bhavati. Again, it is indicated as paranimittam. In this way, Purvanimittam is Panchami. What a beautiful system. Sthani is Shashti, Paranimittam is Saptami. All sequential vibhaktis are used for Uddesha, and the Prathama is used for Vidheya. Vidheyasya nirdeshartham Prathama vibhaktihi bhavati. Vadaha Supi Kyap Cha. Kyap iti Prathamayam vidyamanah shabdah vidheyam asti. Kyap iti pratyayah vidhiyate. Trestrayah. Trayah iti adeshah vidhiyate. ह्रस्वनत्यापो नुट, नुट इति आगमः विधीयते. तासस्त्योर् लोपः, लोपः प्रथमायाम् अस्ति, लोपः विधीयते. अचोरहाभ्यां द्वे, द्वे इति पुनः प्रथमायाम् अस्ति, द्वित्वं विधीयते. So in all these cases, the vidheya is indicated by prathama vibhakti, uddesha is indicated by panchami, shashti or saptami, and there can be many uddeshas and many vidheyas. So I actually have shown some examples on previous slide, but I still collected a few more. कुत्रचित् सूत्रेषु द्वे अथवा अधिकानि उद्देश्यानि अधिकानि विधेयानि अपि सन्ति. यथा मस्जिनशोः झली इति सूत्रे मस्जिनशोः इति षष्ठी द्विवचनम्. So two uddeshas, two sthanis, masj and nash are being indicated. हल्ग्याभ्यो दीर्घात् सुतिस्य प्रोक्तम हल. हल्ग्याभ्यः is panchami bahuvachan. So multiple purva nimittas are being indicated over here. Rathavadayoscha, we saw this particular sutram. Rathavadayoho saptami dvivachanam. So multiple paranimittas are indicated. Nandigrahi pachadibhyo luninyacha. Everybody of you knows this sutram. Nandigrahi pachadibhyo, that's the panchami bahuvachanam. Three purva nimittas are indicated. Luninyacha, these are the pratyayas. Three vidheyas are indicated. So three purva nimittas or three aprakritis and three vidheyas, one-to-one mapping. Yatha sankhyam pratyavidhanam bhavati. In this way, remember this particular diagram that was shown earlier. The uddesha is panchami, shashti, saptami. Purva nimitta is panchami, sthani or agami shashti. Paranimitta is saptami. Videya is prathama. Another pause. If there are any questions, please raise hands. I'm surprised no questions. Either everything was already known or everything is super clear. Whatever it is. Let's go to the next particular point. Now, sometimes what happens is that okay, now there is a question. Chandramouli Mahoday.
So if you were to look at the system that you just spoke about, Shashti Sthani Yoga, Saptami, Panchami, and Prathama Vibhakti, right? I was wondering if is that rule even applicable for Sanya Sutram, for example, in Adarshanam Lopaha?
Yes, I mean Adarshan for what happens is Samnya Sutram is actually it is a Visheshan Vishesha Bhava. Adarshanam is being called Lopa. So then you don't need this particular mechanism for Samnyas, right?
I'm wondering, is the reason why you use the Lopaha in the Prathama with is it because it's a Vidheya there? No,
In
there is no.
Adarshanam Lopaha?
Huh?
Yes, Adarshanam Lopa, Lopa will be Vidheya because Adarshanam is known to you. Lopaha is being newly taught, but it's the term. It is not Lopaha Bhavati. It is Lopa Samnya Vidhiyate.
Oh,
So,
okay.
get the difference?
Okay. And when do you use the word Syat?
In
Because
all the
in
Vidhi
some
Sutras, you
some
will use that.
words, in some common books, Syat means probable, is also used in probably, right?
Correct, correct, correct. So, Bhavati ityasya sthane Syat iti vaktavyam. Is possible to apply. Is that what all that we say?
Okay, got it.
Okay. Ratnakar Mahoday.
Acharya, this is more or less a weird question, in fact. 4 years back, I brought the Telugu version of Ashtadhyayi, where it has 2 volumes. So when I look at your teaching, unless one understands these concepts, there is no point in reading or going through the sutras that were there in the book. Yeah, am I correct? So,
Correct. I mean, these are very basic. You can still memorize the sutras. Memorization doesn't need to need the meaning, but you know to properly understand the meaning. All this is like extremely fundamental.
okay. So that's the reason I could not understand even a single word.
No.
Fine.
There is another question over here. Like there can be multiple Purvanimittam and Paranimittam, can there be multiple Sthanis too? Obviously, I mean, I'm not sure if this is the multiple sthani, like tasastyoho lopaha. So tas pratyay and astadhatu etayoho lopaha bhavati. So you can have multiple sthanis, multiple purvanittam, multiple paranimittam, and so on. All possible cases are there. Any further questions? Okay, agre gacchamaha. Now, sometimes what happens is this is very easy said than actually done, that you have such a different, proper partitioning that Purvanimitta is Panchami and Paranimitta is Saptami and so on. The things become complicated because words are being used as anuvrittis. So sometimes a purva nimitta in the previous sutram comes as an anuvritti to indicate a paranimittam in the next sutram, or comes as an anuvritti to indicate the sthani in the next sutram. So sometimes these vibhaktis need to be changed, and you need to learn that from the commentaries. Panini Maharshi uses this ambiguity, a small amount of ambiguity, not the full one, but a small amount of ambiguity if it helps in alpaksharatvam. So alpaksharatvam is always the very first principle. So that's what we say alpaksharam asandigdam. First is alpaksharatvam. So in order to achieve alpaksharatvam, some small amount of circus, like for example, changing the vibhaktis and so on. So this was another topic in the previous class I mentioned. There are so many things for alpaksharatvam that we are not talking about. So changing the vibhaktis, vibhakti viparinamaha. Sometimes vibhaktis get changed because that those original vibhaktis were added for alpaksharatvam. More interestingly, the question comes when a particular sutram included anuvrittis and so on are included, has paranimittam, it has a purvanimittam, but there is no particular visible sthani. So in any of the sutras, you don't see a shashtyantam padam that can be brought in. Panchamyanta, either it is already present or it can be brought in, or saptamyanta padam is also possible to be brought in. So kutrachit sutre shashtyantam padameva na vartate, parantu panchamyanta padam asti. So there is a purva nimitta, saptamyanta padam api asti, paranimitta, but you don't know who is the sthani. So sthani kaha, agami kaha iti prashnaha tatra udeti. So there is a paribhasha. Paribhasha again is used to, the reason why paribhashas are written is to address these kind of ambiguities, these kind of confusions. So in a particular case, and actually you can see many such examples in Ashtadhyayi, where you can easily spot a paranimitta and a purvanimitta, and you can also see an adesha or an agama, but you don't know who is the sthani. So in such a case, sthani kaha, agami kaha iti prashne jate, there is a paribhasha that is used, ubhaya nirdeshe panchami nirdesho baliyan. So when Purva Nimitta is shown in Panchami and the Paranimitta is shown in Saptami and there is nobody to indicate the Shashti, the fight happens between the Panchami and Saptami and Panchami wins over Saptami. Ubhaya Nirdeshe, Ubhaya ityukte Panchami Saptami Nirdeshe, Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan, powerful. Panchami Nirdesha is powerful, which means the Panchami Vibhakti will retain its meaning of Purvanimittam, and Saptami, instead of indicating Paranimittam, it will change and will indicate the Sthani or the Agami. So when you have two endpoints and nothing in between or nothing specified in between, the Paranimittam transforms in the sense Vibhakti doesn't change, but that Paranimittam, the Paranimittam in the Saptami, that particular Saptami doesn't get transformed per se to Shashti, but instead of indicating the Paranimitta, it will now start indicating the Sthani. So Panchami Vibhakti swasya artham na tyajati. Saptami Vibhakti swasya artham ityukte paranimittam iti artham tyaktva sthaninah nirdesham karoti. Agaminaha nirdesham karoti. And this kind of conflict between Panchami and Saptami, you typically see to indicate an agami, the place where agama comes. There are only one or two cases, and that also not easy to understand, little bit advanced, where a sthani is being decided like this. So we will keep those aside. Most of the cases that you will ever come across in your Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi course, even not even just this, but even in the Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi course, is mainly the decision of who is the agami. So here is an example. This is the sutram for the Gamudagama Sandhi. Gamorhaswadachi gamunnityam. You don't need to understand the sutram. I'll just give you the simple meaning. So gam varnat parasya. Gam is a pratyahara. Gam varnat parasya. Achvarne pare ngamutagamaha bhavati. So the ngamut agama happens. So agama is given. So vidheya is given. Ngam varnat parasya. So purva nimitta is given. Achvarne pare. So paranimittam is given. Now, does it mean that any random XYZ present between the ngam and the ach get the ngamudagama? That's never how the Vyakarana works. You have to specify things. You can't randomly say put an X and do the transformation on it. So, ngam varnat parha kim asti? Ach varne pare ityukte ach varnat purvam kim asti? Yasya ngamutagamaha bhavati. So, agami is not present. Ngamaha is panchami, so that's the paranimittam. Achi is Saptami, that's the Purva Nimittam. Ngamut iti Agamaha, that's the Vidheyam. In this particular situation, Ubhaya Nirdeshe Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan. So Ngamaha will retain its meaning of Purva Nimittam. Achi will leave its meaning of Paranimittam, and now it will start indicating the Agami. So Achi iti Saptamyantam Padam. स्वस्य परनिमित्तम इति अर्थम त्यक्त्वा आगमिनः निर्देशं करोति. सो अच् वर्णस्य आगमः भवति. सो ngam वर्णात् परस्य अच् वर्णस्य ngमुटागमः भवति इति आशयः. Second example, डह सी धुट्. डह इति पंचमी अस्ति परनिमित्तम. सो डकारात् परस्य sakare pare dhudagamaha bhavati. So agama is given, paranimitta is given, C is the saptami, which is the paranimittam. This is typing mistake. So panchami must be called paranimittam. Panchami must be called purvanimittam. Saptami must be called paranimittam. Here also in the previous, panchami is purvanimittam. Saptami is paranimittam. I did typo in two cases. So Panchami is always Purva Nimittam, Saptami is always Paranimittam. Sorry for this typo. What I was saying? So da si dhutta ityatra. Somebody is saying Panchami and Saptami are interchanged. Vidya Bhagini, can you raise the hand? Sorry, is there a typo in the slide?
न महोदय भवानेव उक्तवान् तदेव
Asti. Okay, you must have written earlier, I saw it just now. Okay, no worries. Astu. So basically C iti saptami paranimittam asti. Saptami is paranimittam, panchami is purvanimittam. So panchami iti purvanimittam asti. Daha iti panchami, that is the purvanimittam. C iti saptami, that is the paranimittam. Dhutta iti agamaha, that is the vidheyam. So you have the other three components, but you don't have the agami. So what happens? उभय निर्देशे पंचमी निर्देशो बलीयान. So अस्याम स्थितौ सी इति सप्तम्यन्तं पदं स्वस्य परनिमित्तम् इति अर्थं त्यक्त्वा आगमिनः निर्देशं करोति. So डकारात् परस्य सकारस्य, not sakare pare, sakarasya dhut agamaha bhavati. So again I wrote it down, Mamut, copy paste. Shouldn't do copy pasting. Dhut agamaha bhavati. So sakarat parasya dhut agam, sorry, dakarat parasya sakarasya dhut agamaha bhavati. In this particular way, ubhaya nirdeshe panchami nirdesho baliyan indicates that when a sthani or agami is not explicitly indicated and there is a conflict between panchami and saptami. By the way, when I say not explicitly indicated, you can bring it through anuvrittis. All ekavakyata is already done. We are talking what happens after ekavakyata. So whether that shashti, the sthani comes from anuvritti and so on is irrelevant. Even after considering anuvrittis, adhikaras and so on, if you don't find the sthani or the agami, that's the question. Then you will always find panchami and saptami because nothing is available, won't make any sense. So panchami and saptami will be available. In such a case, when there is a conflict of deciding who is the sthani, ubhay nirdeshe panchami nirdesho baliyan, so panchami vibhakti will retain its meaning, saptami vibhakti will leave its meaning of paranimittam. Instead, it will start becoming the agami or the sthani. And as I mentioned, most of the examples that you will consider or you will even learn through the course are only related to agami and not related to sthani. Any questions? Okay, we are almost ending the class. 2 more slides and we should be done on time. So when it comes to this particular topics of uddesha and vidheya, another very important thing that we need to learn in this particular ekavakyata, in this particular expansion. So first thing is, which is the uddesha, which is the vidheya, the uddesha, whether it is a purvanimittam, paranimittam, sthani and so on. So that is all done. Now, once you identify all these things, like this is the paranimittam, this is the purvanimittam, this is the sthani and so on. Similarly, this is the vidheyam and so on. The question is, whatever you see on that particular statement, ach, for example, if you see ach as the purvanimittam or you see ach as the sthani, what is the expansion of ach? It is a, e, u, ru, lu, a, o, I, o. So there is no a, there is no dirgha ikara, there is no dirgha ukara, pluta ukara, and so on. So are all these individual letters going to do the savarna grahanam? Savarna grahanam ityukte savarnanam grahanam. So when you, for example, say iko yan achi, this is the sutram for the yana sandhi. It's there in one of the recent homeworks, I think. So iko yan achi, I think 7th homework, which I am recently correcting. In 7th homework, I think this question was there. Iko yan achi. So achi iti saptami asti, paranimittam asti. So it is the ach entity which is acting as the paranimittam. And when you expand ach pratyahara, you don't see an a, you don't see an e, you only see a, e, u and so on. In one of the earlier classes, I just made a brief mention that pratyaharaha samanya rupena savarna grahanam kurvanti. So anytime you mention acha, it will include a, e, u and so on. That was just a general statement Here we are actually going to go in deeper details and understand or evaluate the truth value of that particular statement and learn where exactly that ach will do the savarna grahanam and where that ach will not do the savarna grahanam. So there are two things that we are going to talk over here. One is the savarna grahanam done by individual letters. If you say a, will it mean a and a both, or will it only mean a? By the way, when I say savarna grahanam, technically all 18 are coming in the picture, but this udatta, anudatta, swarita, we no more consider in the language or in at least the initial grammatical derivations. So you can keep udatta, anudatta, swarita aside. Similarly, anunasika, ananunasika can be kept aside. Therefore, the practical meaning of savarna grahanam is rasva versus dirgha, because pluta also doesn't participate. So in basic general derivations, when you are deriving rama, ramo, ramaha, or patati, patata, patanti, and so on, pluta is out of question, udatta, anudatta, swarita is out of question, anunasika, ananunasika is also out of question. So technically, not technically, for all practical purposes, when you are saying savarna grahanam, it is all about whether a rasva brings a dirgha. So akarena akarasya grahanam bhavati va, नो चेत् आकारेण इकारेण ईकारस्य ग्रहणं भवति वा, and so on. So उद्देश्य विधेययोः सवर्ण ग्रहणम. So two things, as I was talking, two things that we are going to talk. One is individual swaras or individual letters, whether they do savarna grahanam. And second, letters inside the pratyahara, will they do savarna grahanam? So when I simply say a, will it mean a and a? And when I say a in acha pratyahara, will it mean a and a? Let's understand the answers to these questions. So if a swara is used in the uddeshya, it will always do savarna grahanam. So uddeshe prayuktaha swaraha nityam savarna grahanam kurvanti. This is the reason why uddesha and videya needs to be understood properly. Because unless you understand what is an uddesha and what is a videya, you cannot decide the savarna grahanam result. And unless you do the savarna, unless you understand whether savarna grahanam happens or not, you will not be able to understand whether the sutra is to be applicable only for a or also for a and a. So uddeshe prayuktaha swaraha nityam savarna grahanam kurvanti. This actual process of including the savarnas along with it is called savarna grahanam. So let's take this sutram asya chvau. The meaning of this sutram is that avarnanta shabdasya. See, asya. A is the sthani. Sya. The shashti is used to indicate the sthani. So avarnanta shabdasya chvi pratyaye pare. Chvau is saptami. Like munau, it becomes chvau. So chvi pratyaye pare. Now you should understand all this deciphering. Saptami means para and shashti means sthani and so on. So avarnantasya shabdasya chvi pratyaye pare ikaradeshah bhavati. E is the sthani that, sorry, E is the adesha that comes as an anuvritti. So a is the sthani. This is the uddesha because it is indicated in shashti. Uddeshas are in panchami, shashti, saptami. So this uddesha will include a as well as a. So shukla, which is akar, hasva akaranta shabda, that will get e. Shukli bhavati. Ganga, that is akaranta word, it will also get e. Gangi karoti. So in this particular way, an uddesha, the swara used in uddesha, will always do the savarna grahanam. Swara is indicated over here because vyanjanas typically don't do savarna grahanam. If you say k, it will not indicate kha, ga, gha, and so on. There is a separate mechanism for the savarna grahanam of vyanjanas. We will talk about it at some other point in time. But here, uddeshe prayuktaha swaraha nityam savarna grahanam kurvanti. Now, this is a problem because sometimes if I only want to indicate rasva akara as the sthani, then I don't have a mechanism to indicate rasva akara as the sthani. Anytime I say asya, it will include rasva and dirgha akara both. So in order to block that particular default savarna grahanam, Panini Maharshi comes with a technique. He says, uddeshe prayuktat swarat anantaram, nochet swarat purvam, either way, on either sides. If there is a special marker called half It's a very special marker. If half takara is present either immediately after that swara or before that swara, then the savarna grahanam is blocked. So if you want to give a karya only for rasva akara, whether it is purva nimitta, paranimitta, sthani, doesn't matter. If the karya is to be given in the context only of rasva akara, then you cannot use simply a, because simply saying a as an uddesha will indicate akara also, savarna grahanam will happen. So you have to add the small t after that a, and you have to say atta. So what is the difference between atta and a? Atta is only rasva akara, a is rasva and dirgha akara. So ato bhisais, this is a sutram in which you see this particular ato word present. So ato is the panchami, it is the purva nimitta. So ataha iti panchamyantam rupam asti. At is the moola word. अस्मिन् शब्दे अ इत्यस्मात् अनन्तरं त इति वर्णः स्थापितः अस्ति. अस्यां स्थितौ अ इत्यनेन सवर्णग्रहणं न क्रियते. So this sutra means only ह्रस्व अकारात् विहितस्य भिस् तृतीया बहुवचन सु औजस् औक्षस् ताभ्यां भिस्. So तृतीया बहुवचनस्य भिस् इति प्रत्ययस्य ऐस् ऐहि iti adesha bhavati. So Rama becomes Ramaihi. That Aihi is by this sutram. Hrasva akarat parasya bhis pratyasya ais adesha bhavati. And now you can see, because this ta is added, this process is called tapara karanam. So because this tapara karanam is done, unlike the previous sutram, the ato bhis ais sutram is not applicable for akara. So unlike this, Ganga also became Gangi because it was simply asya. Here, for the word mala, you will not get the savarna grahanam. So you will not get the ais adesha because mala has akara, and a followed by a ta, which means tapara karanam, will not do savarna grahanam. So saha savarna grahanam na karoti. So ataha atra akarasya vishaye eva idam sutram pravartate. Just one small point, savarna grahanam na karoti that I have written is technically slightly incorrect. What I should have said is kevalam swa kala bhedanam eva grahanam karoti. So when you say all the 6 bhedas of that is rasva and the 6 bhedas, udatta, anudatta, swarita, multiplied by anunasika and ananunasika. These 6 bhedas are included when you do atta. But dirgha and pluta are crossed out. But as I already mentioned, we are ignoring all those other aspects. We are only considering the hrasva and dirgha. So in that frame of reference, this wording is correct. Savarna grahanam na karoti ityukte dirghasya grahanam na karoti. So a hrasva swara will not indicate a dirgha swara when tapara karanam is present. So that is for the uddesha. Uddesha without a taparakaranam will include the dirgha, and uddesha with taparakaranam will not include the dirgha. And when it comes to vidheya, vidheya never does a savarna grahanam. Why? Because if a vidheya does a savarna grahanam, then multiple entities can simultaneously come as adesha and agama, and more complicated logic would be needed. So Panini Maharshi makes it simple by saying vidheye prayuktaha swaraha kadapi savarna grahanam na kurvanti. So here is an example. Tyadadinam aha. Tyadadinam shashti. So sthani. So tyadadi ganasya shabdanam. Tyadadi is a group of words. Etesham shabdanam a iti adeshaha bhavati. A is the prathama, it is adesha. So tyadadi ganasya shabdanam a iti adeshaha bhavati. Now a is the vidheya. A vidheya never does a savarna grahanam. So the adesha will only be hrasva akara. Adesha can never be dirgha akara. You don't need any tapara karanam or anything over here because tapara karanam is only for uddesha. It is not for vidheya. Vidheye prayuktaha swaraha kadapi savarna grahanam na kurvanti. So tyada, this particular transformation akara desha will only be for the hrasva akara. प्रत्य अनेन प्रकारेण आदेशः भवति. So here the rule is that उद्देश्ये प्रयुक्ताः स्वराः नित्यं सवर्णग्रहणं कुर्वन्ति, विधेये प्रयुक्ताः स्वराः कदापि सवर्णग्रहणं न कुर्वन्ति, and उद्देश्यस्य विषये तत्परकरणमस्ति चेत् सवर्णग्रहणं नियम्यते नो चेत् निषिध्यते. इत्युक्ते ह्रस्वेन दीर्घस्य ग्रहणं न भवति. One last slide. That now on this slide we are going to see what happens with the pratyaharastha varna. If a letter is in the pratyahara, same rule. If it is uddesha, it will do the savarna granam. If it is vidhesha, if it is vidheya, it will not do the savarna granam. But let's see the examples. Before that, the Vargiya Vyanjanas, as I mentioned in the previous slide also, Vargiya Vyanjanas, there is no question of Savarna Granam at all. That's why on the previous slide also, only Swaras were discussed. So, Char iti pratyahare, Chakara, Takara, Takara, Kakara, Pakara, they will not do individual Savarna Granam. As far as the Pratyahara is concerned, Uddesha Rupena Prayujjante Chet, Savarna Granam Bhavati, Videya Rupena Prayujjante Chet, Savarna Granam na kurvanti. So for the Antasthas, you still see the Savarna Granam over here. For the Vargiya Vyanjanas, you will not see the Savarna Granam. That's what the previous bullet was mentioning. And here, the Uddesha Rupena Vidhiyamanaha Swaraha, Nochet Antasthaha Savarna Granam kurvanti. परंतु विधेय रूपेण विधीयमानाः विधेय रूपेण प्रयुक्ताः स्वराः अंतस्थाः सवर्णग्रहणं न कुर्वन्ति. So the same rule as the previous one. If it is uddesha, savarnagranam will not happen. If it is a videya, savarnagranam will happen. Somebody is asking a question over here. The savarna is it only the kala bheda? So in this particular discussion, yes, only kala bheda, because as I mentioned, anunasika, ananunasika, and so on, we will keep that aside. Once we go over a little bit few more detailed sutras, we will talk about again anunasika and ananunasika. And udatta anudatta swarita, anyway that swara discussion will not be needed for all our derivations, and therefore we'll keep that completely aside, and therefore only kala bhedas are being discussed right now. That also pluta is kept aside. You never see pluta except for those Sambodhanas, He Devadatta, and so on. So only Raswa and Dirgha are being part of this discussion. And what we are saying is that the Savarna Grahanam will happen for an Uddesha, it will not happen for a Videya. So Iko Yanachi, classic example. Ikaha iti Shashti, Yana iti Prathama, Achi iti Saptami. So Ika is the Uddesha, Ach is also the Uddesha. So for both of them, the Savarna Grahanam will happen, which means that Raswa Ikara, Dirgha Ikara will participate in Yana Sandhi. Achi, so Akare Pare api Yanadesha, Akare Pare api Yanadesha. But that Yana is the Uddesha. It will not, sorry, but that Yana in Prathama is the Videya. So it will not do Savarna Grahanam. So the ya will not include anunasika ya. Anyway, la will not include the anunasika la because the savarna granam will not happen. The videya does not do savarna granam. So yana iti vidheyam asti, yana pratyaharena savarna granam na bhavati. Ataha anunasika yakara vakara lakaraha adesha rupena na vidhiyante. Another example, echah igrhasvadeshe. See the sutra, it says that you have an H letter. H is not English H, H pratyahar. H letter, tasya hrasvadeshah kartavyah asti chet ik varnah adesha rupena vidhiyate. So anytime you want to convert an H letter, ekara, okara, aikara, aukara to hrasva form, an ik letter, I, U, Ru, Lu will come as an adesha. So this ikka is the vidheya. This vidheya will not undergo a savarna granam, which means that I, U, Ru, Lu in this ikka cannot include the dirgha bhedas. अतः आदेश रूपेण केवलं ह्रस्व इ उरुलु वर्णाः एव विधीयन्ते सवर्णाः इत्युक्ते दीर्घभेदाः न. So for example, if you take this particular word susmrute, there is some word called susmrute and some sutram forces a hrasvadesha. So ekarasya hrasvadesha, you can have either e or e, but e cannot come because ikka is the adesha. It will not do the savarna granam. So ekarasya hrasvadeshe ikaraha hrasva ikaraha. Similarly, atirai becomes atiri. Upago becomes upagu. all A, I, O are dirgha, but their Raswa Desha will still be Raswa because Ik, which is an Adesha, will not do Savarna Grahanam. So in this particular way, in today's class, we covered a whole bunch of stuff. We learned how to unfold a sutram. We learned how to place anuvrittis, adhikaras, and so on. How to do ekavakyata. After the ekavakyata is done, how to find uddesha and vidheya. How is the purva nimitta represented? How is the sthani represented? How is the paranimitta represented? How is the vidheyam, adesha, and so on represented? And then we also saw how that uddesham or vidheyam gets expanded when it comes to savarna grahanam. The uddesha in general will always do the savarna grahanam, but you can add a takara to block that savarna grahanam. So rasva will not include the dirgha, and the vidheya will never do the savarna grahanam. That's the gist of today's class. Very important discussion. Here is the homework. Laghu tippanim likhata. Write a small note. एकवाक्यता प्रत्याहारस्थवर्णैः सवर्णग्रहणम् उद्देश्यविधेययोः सवर्णग्रहणम् उद्देश्यविधेययोः निर्देशार्थं विभक्तिप्रयोगः उभयनिर्देशे पञ्चमीनिर्देशो बलीयान्. So उद्देश्यविधेययोः सवर्णग्रहणम् उद्देश्यविधेययोः एकस्वरस्य सवर्णग्रहणम्. So instead of प्रत्याहारस्थवर्णानाम् एकस्वरस्य सवर्णग्रहणम् like a and so on. And then second question, प्रत्येकं सूत्रस्य संदर्भेण यथा निर्दिष्टं कोष्ठकं निर्मात. So I have given you a table. You have to replicate this table. Don't write essays. Only replicate this table. 5 lines or 6 lines, whatever. Anuvritti sahitam sutram. Uddesham. Find a sthani. Find a paranimittam. Find a purva nimittam. So if a purva nimittam is not there, you can omit that line. If a paranimittam is not there, omit that line. If there are multiple uddeshas, write them one after the other or in different rows, whatever you want. But don't write anything beyond this table. So anuvritti sahitam sutram, uddesham, sthani, paranimittam, purvanittam, vidheyam, adesha, agama, lopa, and so on. And the sutrartha using what you learned today, not what is on the website. Purely using what you learned today. Shashti means sthane, panchami means tasmat parasya. So see this sutrartha. Ikvarnasya. So ikaha will become ikvarnasya. Achvarne pare. So achi means achvarne pare. Yan adeshaha. So yan adeshaha. And instead of bhavati, you can say syat. So ikvarnasya achvarne pare yan adeshaha syat. So you have to write exactly like this. Don't write anything extra. 10 sutras are given. Happy investigations. And you should be able to, I mean, see these sutras in now 18th class. I have not taught you any sutram. I have not taught you Jhalam Jashi, Eng Rasvat Sambuddhe, Idamo Maha Ato Bhisais, but you will be surprised that you are now in a position to actually understand and interpret these sutras once you understand this machinery that has been discussed today. And what I discussed today was just a tip, because there are other things like Visheshana Visheshayoho Sambandhaha. Lopaha kutra bhavati, adeshaha kutra bhavati, agamaha kutra bhavati, and so on. More important topic, after you do all this analysis, what is the final guarantee that a sutra will be applicable? What will happen, or how do we know if yet another sutra comes apavada and blocks the application of this particular sutram? So that's the last bullet in our, in our bag or whatever, that given any particular sutram, you expand it, you do ekavakyata and so on, and now that the sutram is being applied, somebody else shuts that sutra off. So that is the topic for tomorrow's class. Sutreshu vidyamanaha badhya badhaka bhavaha. So that's where we stop for today. Let me take the questions. There is a question over here. What is the exact difference between sthani and agami? If it is an adesha, you call the original place as a sthani. If it is an agama, you call the original place as agami. So that's the only difference. Purnima Bhagini.
Namaste Mohdaya. My question is like vibhakti bheda, like panchami shashti, whether it is panchami or shashti, you said you have to see the vyakhana, but I don't know anything, like if given a sutra, where to go and check.
Oh,
like
for the homework specifically, if you're asking.
No, not like that, sir. Generally,
Oh, vyakhana to
I
vishesha
have no knowledge.
pratipatti. I mean, that always comes as the first paribhasha, right? So if you go to paribhasha, I'm just digression, but if you go to Paribhashendu Shekhara, even before you start learning anything, he says Vyakhyanato Vishesha Pratipatti. Even before you read my book, understand that commentary is the final go-to place. That's the reason why this website is built. It's so as to have access to all the commentaries at once. So specifically coming about any general sutra, you look at the Padacheda and at least this Anuvritti, at least this Padacheda, you see no as an avyayam, dhatu lopa as saptami ekvachanam, ardha dhatu as saptami ekvachanam, and so on. I mean, website in the sense, books will also give these things, all the Sutra Patha books that are available in print. So that's the
So
answer.
I have to refer something and then only I will understand. Otherwise, it is.
Of course, yeah. Otherwise, there is no need of having Vyakhyanas. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, all
So,
this that I discussed, see, it's very simple that I'll give you a different analogy and you'll understand. All grammar can be learned from textbooks, but you need a teacher. Without teacher, even if you read books again and again and again, there will always be some lacuna in your understanding. Exactly in the same way, replicate the scenario. All the sutras can be understood on your own, but with help of commentaries. You get what I'm saying? So you always need commentaries to help you out where you are stuck.
okay.
That's all.
So then Asya will have both Rusva and Dirgha included. Then Ata will only have the Rusva Akara.
Correct.
Then At, if it is there, then what it...
Correct. That's a very good question. And there is a reason I omitted that because I didn't want to go in complexities. But please understand this, that Savarna Grahanam is always a process of going from Rasva to Dirgha. If I mention A, then it is, I mean, as you know, taking hat of Panini, when will I mention A? I will mention A only when I want to say A. If I want to say A and A, there is no reason for me to mention A, right? I will always mention A. I will always mention A. So anytime when I want to create a sutram and I want to mention Raswa and Dirgha both, the natural inclination is to indicate it by Raswa. So when a Dirgha is explicitly mentioned, it will never do Savarna Grahanam by the definition that it is Dirgha. Whereas a Raswa will or will not do Savarna Grahanam based on the rules given over here. Is this clear? Okay. Ratnakar Mahoday.
Acharya, with all due excuses, having heard today's class, now I feel that straight going into Lagu Siddhanta Kaumudi or Vaiyakaran Siddhanta Kaumudi, it's a little wrong direction of teaching or wrong approach to the Vyakarana. That's what I feel. There are universities that are offering straight away Lagu Siddhanta Kaumudi or Vaiyakaran Siddhanta Kaumudi courses. But now I understand that it should not be so. Am I correct my statement?
So I'll tell you the background of this. See, what happens is 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and so on, this culture was there in the society that kids used to start memorizing Amara Kosha or used to memorize Ashtadhyayi Sutras when they were 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, and so on. So by the time they reach 8, 10, 12, most of these sutras would be known to them at least by the name. And at such a place, understanding the meaning becomes very easy when you have that language in your environment. Unfortunately, things have changed and the curriculum hasn't. That's why this discrepancy has come, which you have pointed out. But other than that.
And secondly, wherever and whenever you are using the sutras right now in this particular module or course, do you want us to look at Vyakhyana and understand that?
No, I don't want you to look at a Vyakhyana. I have not taught any single sutram in this course. So you don't need to know Asyachvo, Atobhisa, and so on, except for the context. So here you need to know what is Prathama, what is Panchami, what is Saptami, and so on. I will officially start teaching sutras from class number 21. And I'm going to number the sutras 1, 2, 3 up to 400. So that point you will understand that this is being officially taught.
Oh, that is my problem. When I look at Vyakhyana, not even a single word, I'm unable to.
That's okay. They don't.
Okay, fine. That's it. Thank you.
Sudhavalli ji.
Mahoday.
Namaste.
See, in this course, some of the sutras you are going to teach, but the sutras are interlinked. Many of the sutras are interlinked. Is there any marking for learning 400 sutras or 1200 sutras like that? they are classifying the Lagu Siddhanta Kaumudi, Madhya Siddhanta Kaumudi, like that. But how this 400 or 1200 are taken away from the 4000?
Oh, it's basically like, for example, if you want to learn all English words, how will you take simple words first, and then little complex words, and then more complex words, and so on. So basically, somebody who knows a meaning of all these 4,000 sutras will be able to understand that these 1,000 sutras or these 500 sutras are the most fundamental. So for example, Ramaha, Ramo, Ramaha. For derivation of that, these 20 sutras are needed, and derivation of Ramaha, Ramo, Ramaha is most fundamental. So I need to teach these 20 sutras. But specific border cases like Pati, for example, or Sakhi, Sakha, Sakhayev, Sakhaya, that's a corner case. So maybe we'll not learn that in those 400 sutras. So this way, whatever are the basic usages, so Pathati, Pathata, Pathanti, we'll definitely learn. But some weird verb which is not in the normal form, we'll probably not learn. So that's how, even in the Lagu Siddhanta Kaumudi, they do that. Simple pratyayas are taken, simple forms are taken, complex are omitted out. That's all.
Dhanyawad.
Anything else, any particular questions, any particular comments, and so on. So today was 19th class, tomorrow is 20th class. Tomorrow will be the end of the second module of this course, which is Paniniyam, and then after that we will start the third module, which is the Samnya Paribhasham. After tomorrow's class, next week I plan to give off in the sense I will teach one class on how to use Ashtadhyayi website. And then on the next day, if you have any doubts, please send in advance on the group. If there are no doubts, we can probably cancel the class just to give a small break. Regarding homeworks, most of the homeworks are corrected, I think, except homework 7. And for some people, homework 6 is pending. I should be able to correct that by, say, tomorrow or day after. Make sure that all your homeworks till whatever 14th homework number are submitted by 31st. On 31st, I'll just clean the group. I'll remove all people from the classroom because it is also pain for me to see all those missing on that particular classroom. So I'll remove people from the group. I'll remove them from the classroom, and we should continue for the next module. Samapayamaha. So as I mentioned, tomorrow we are going to continue this topic, and we are going to talk about the fight between the sutras, Utsarga and Apavada between the sutras. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानामुपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः। धन्यवादः।